Welcome to Dreamscribe, your companion on the journey to peaceful sleep. Before you drift off, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps this calming community grow. Where in the world are you tuning in from? I've always loved night drives. There's something peaceful about an open highway, the way the world narrows down to just the stretch of asphalt ahead and the occasional glow of passing signs. It makes you feel like the only person left awake, like time itself slows down. That was the feeling I had when I took that desert highway last night, just me, my RV, and miles of empty road. But I can't shake the feeling now that something was watching me the whole time. I didn't notice the first sign at first. I was on Route 160, a long stretch of road cutting through the middle of nowhere. The stars were out, the road was dry, and the glow of my headlights cast long shadows over the cracked pavement. My GPS had already warned me there wouldn't be much for the next 100 miles. Just road, a few scattered gas stations, and a lot of nothing. That was fine by me. I wasn't in a rush. I had been driving since sunset, heading toward a small town I could barely remember the name of. Something with a Spanish-sounding twist. Los Cerros? Los Cerritos? I wasn't sure. The plan was simple: find a quiet RV park, get some rest, and continue my trip the next day. Then I saw the sign. It was an old metal road sign with one of those green reflective surfaces. The kind you barely notice unless your headlights catch it just right. It should have said something mundane: next exit, 10 miles or rest stop ahead. But as my RV rolled past, the words looked wrong. The letters seemed slightly melted. I slowed down. I even considered pulling over, but at the speed I was going, the sign had already disappeared in the rearview mirror. Maybe it was just some old, sun-damaged sign. Heat does that to metal, right? It made sense. This was desert country. Signs out here had probably been roasting under the sun for decades. Still, something about it nagged at me. A few miles later, I passed another one. This time, I made sure to glance at it straight on. Rest stop ahead, for miles. Nothing strange. The letters looked normal, evenly spaced, no weird distortions. But when I flicked my eyes back to the road and then instinctively back to the sign, it had changed. The letters had sagged, like they had been printed on wax paper left too close to a fire. The words blurred, their meaning slipping, shifting, until I swore I saw something else written there. Keep driving. I blinked hard. The words were gone. The sign looked normal again in the rearview mirror. Rest stop ahead, for miles. I exhaled a shaky breath. Tired. I was just tired. I had been driving for hours. My eyes were playing tricks on me, distorting road signs like mirages on hot pavement. That had to be it. Still, I turned on my radio for some noise, hoping it would help keep my head straight. A static-filled country station buzzed to life, but the reception was spotty. It faded in and out, the singer's voice warping every few seconds. Up ahead, the next sign came into view. I braced myself. It was identical to the last one, warning of the rest stop up ahead. I forced myself to keep my eyes locked on it as I passed, refusing to blink, refusing to look away. At first, it stayed normal. Then, just as my RV's headlights washed over it, the letters melted. Not just warped or faded. I mean melted, like candle wax under an open flame, letters sagging, dripping off the sign in thick, dark globs. The reflective surface rippled like liquid, swallowing the words entirely, leaving nothing but a blank, green rectangle. I slammed on the brakes. The RV lurched to a stop, the tires skidding slightly on the asphalt. My heart was hammering. I twisted in my seat, looking back at the sign through my side mirror. It was normal again. Rest stop ahead, 2 miles. I swallowed. The world outside my RV was utterly still. No other cars. No wind. Even the radio had gone silent. Nothing but soft static whispering from the speakers. I ran a hand down my face. Okay, just need a break. 2 miles. I could make it 2 more miles. I put the RV in gear and kept driving, fingers tight around the wheel. The rest stop was a small, desolate pull-off area with a single vending machine and a bathroom stall made of cinder blocks. A few flickering streetlights cast pale yellow halos onto the pavement, barely illuminating the area. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there in silence. Through the windshield, I could see another road sign standing near the entrance of the rest stop. It was another directional marker, pointing toward nearby towns. At first glance, it looked fine, but after what I had just experienced, I didn't trust it. I stepped out of the RV. The air was cool, the smell of hot asphalt still lingering. I approached the sign carefully. My shadow stretched long across the pavement as I drew closer, my pulse pounding in my ears. I needed to prove to myself that it was just my imagination. It looked normal. Los Cerritos, 86 miles. Clifton, 42 miles. Route 16 to 1 mile. I exhaled, half laughing at myself. See? Normal. My brain had just been fried from too many hours on the road. I turned away. A metallic groan creaked behind me. The hairs on my arms stood up. My breath hitched. Slowly, very slowly, I turned back around. The sign had changed. It wasn't subtle this time. The letters had shifted, rearranging themselves into new words, twisting and curling like they were alive. Now it read, "Don't turn around again." My stomach dropped. I took a step back, my entire body breaking out into cold sweat. The sign had moved, I was sure of it. The letters had changed right in front of me. The vending machine behind me hummed softly. The streetlight flickered. I turned, only for a second, just to look at my RV. Another creak. I snapped my head back to the sign. It had changed again. "You shouldn't have looked away." A shiver crawled up my spine. My mouth had gone completely dry. I forced myself to breathe. Forced myself to take a step back toward the RV. The sign loomed over me, the reflective green surface rippling like something breathing. I turned and ran. I yanked the RV door open, jumped inside, and locked it behind me. My fingers were shaking as I jammed the keys into the ignition, my foot slamming against the pedal. The headlights flared to life, and for just a second, in the beam of my lights, I saw something standing next to the sign. Tall, motionless, just standing there. I didn't wait to see more. The tires screeched as I floored the gas, peeling out of the rest stop, barreling back onto the highway at full speed. My hands were white-knuckled around the wheel, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. In the rearview mirror, the road sign shrank into the distance. But before it disappeared completely, before I could finally convince myself I had imagined it, the letters changed one last time. A single word. Lost. I kept driving. My knuckles were still white on the wheel, my pulse pounding in my ears. The eerie silence in the RV felt suffocating, so I cranked up the radio, desperate for any noise that wasn't my own labored breathing. Static. I flipped through stations. More static. Finally, a faint signal cut through. A song, an old one, warbling through the crackling interference. I couldn't make out the words, but it was enough to keep my nerves in check. I focused on the road, forcing myself to think logically. That was the rational explanation, right? Some kind of reflection, heat distortion, or even a prank. Maybe someone had vandalized the signs, swapping the letters to mess with late-night drivers. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had seen the letters shift, heard the metallic groan as they twisted, and that figure, that thing standing next to the last sign. I swallowed hard and forced my eyes forward. I wasn't going to think about it. Not now. The highway stretched out ahead, an endless ribbon of dark asphalt, flanked by nothing but miles of empty desert. No cars, no houses, just the occasional, dimly lit road sign breaking the void. I checked the dashboard clock. 2:37 a.m. I'd keep driving until the next town. No more stops. About 15 minutes later, I saw another sign approaching in the distance. My stomach twisted, but I kept my speed steady. The green reflective surface flickered in my high beams, the letters standing crisp and clear. Los Cerritos, 72 miles. Clifton, 28 miles. Rest stop ahead, 5 miles. I held my breath as I passed. For a moment, nothing happened. No melting, no shifting letters, no whispers in my head. I exhaled, shaking my head. I'm losing it. But just as I glanced in the rearview mirror, the sign was blank. Completely. Not a single word remained. Just a glowing, empty rectangle standing motionless in the dark. A chill crawled up my spine. I blinked, gripping the wheel tighter. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. I looked again. The letters had returned. But they weren't the same. The words had rearranged themselves, forming something new. Turn around. Ice flooded my veins. I nearly swerved off the road. My hands shook violently as I steadied the wheel. I didn't look again. I just kept driving. I drove faster. My headlights cut through the darkness like a blade, the double yellow lines on the road blurring into streaks. The air inside the RV felt thick, almost suffocating. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, but the excuses weren't working anymore. Something was wrong with this road. I just had to make it to Clifton, 28 miles. Then I could find a diner, a gas station, something. Somewhere with people. But a few minutes later, something else caught my attention. The GPS had stopped working. The screen was frozen. The little arrow marking my position wasn't moving. The road in front of me was completely blank, no labels, no turns, just empty white space. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I checked my phone. No signal. Panic clawed at my chest. I glanced at the road signs again, just for reassurance. A new one loomed ahead. My stomach lurched as I read it. Clifton, 42 miles. That wasn't right. A few minutes ago, Clifton was 28 miles away. I had been driving straight, no turns, no stops. Then how was it now 42 miles? I checked the GPS again. The screen remained blank. I clenched my teeth. I should have reached Clifton already. But the highway stretched on endlessly, a black abyss swallowing my headlights. The road was looping. Or worse, I wasn't moving at all. My pulse hammered as I drove on, forcing myself to ignore the signs. Whatever was happening, I needed to stay focused. But then I noticed something else. In my side mirror, a shadow, not a car, not a structure, something tall and thin, standing just at the edge of my high beams. At first, I thought it was just another warped road sign, but as I kept glancing back, it moved. It was walking, no gliding. Its form was long and stretched, its limbs too thin, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. It didn't have a face, just a void where its features should be. My stomach twisted into knots. I pressed down on the accelerator. The RV roared forward, the speedometer creeping past 80 miles per hour. I looked back. The thing was closer. A deep, guttural noise filled the cabin of the RV. A sound that wasn't coming from my speakers, wasn't coming from the road, but from inside my own head. It was like a low, distorted hum, vibrating through my skull, warping my thoughts. I pressed my hands against my ears, gritting my teeth. The next road sign blurred past, barely visible, but I caught a glimpse of its message. IT sees you. I nearly lost control of the wheel. My breathing was ragged. I couldn't stop. I couldn't pull over. I couldn't look back. Whatever this thing was, it was hunting me. And the signs? They weren't just warnings anymore. They were talking to me. I don't know how long I drove. The road seemed endless, looping, stretching further no matter how fast I went. Then I saw an exit ramp. The sign said Clifton 2 miles. Had I finally made it? I didn't care if it was another trick. I turned sharply, tires screeching as I veered off the main highway and onto the exit. The road curved downward, twisting into a dark canyon of rock. The RV's headlights barely lit the way as I sped forward, desperate to escape. But the road signs followed me. They lined the shoulders, each one changing as I passed. Don't slow down. It's behind you. You can't leave. My heart slammed against my ribs. The canyon walls grew higher, closing in. The road narrowed. The RV's engine groaned as the incline steepened. Then, without warning, the road ended. My headlights hit nothing but empty black space. A sheer drop. I slammed the brakes. The RV skidded to a stop, the front tires barely teetering over the edge of a vast, gaping chasm. A canyon that shouldn't exist. My breath caught in my throat. I threw the RV into reverse, tires screeching, engine howling. And then I saw it, standing in the middle of the road behind me. The shadow, closer than before. Its form twisted, shifting unnaturally in the glow of my taillights. Its head tilted, its faceless void staring straight into me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then, the last road sign flickered to life beside me. It glowed with eerie green light, the letters shifting and warping into one final message. No escape. My hands trembled on the wheel. The hum in my skull grew louder, shaking my thoughts apart. I closed my eyes. And then, darkness. I don't know how long I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring into the black void beyond the cliff's edge. The RV's engine rumbled softly, the only sound in the suffocating silence. My breath was uneven, my mind caught between fight and flight. The shadow behind me hadn't moved. Not physically, but I could feel it watching. Its faceless head tilted slightly, the edges of its elongated form rippling, like heat waves rising off pavement. It wasn't bound by normal rules of movement. It didn't need to be. And then, the road signs around me began to melt. I heard it before I saw it, the sickening slither of something viscous, like hot wax dripping from a candle. I turned my head just enough to catch it happening in my peripheral vision. The reflective green metal sagged, warping, its lettering bubbling and stretching into something unnatural. The sign that once said "No escape" shifted again. The letters ran like ink in the rain, twisting, rearranging. "See you soon." A cold bolt of terror shot through my spine. I slammed the RV into reverse, tires screeching, the vehicle jerking backward. I wasn't staying here. I wasn't going to let it get me. The moment I accelerated away from the cliff's edge, the figure lurched forward. It moved wrong, like it was skipping frames in a video, appearing closer with each flicker of my headlights. I stomped on the gas. The RV roared down the twisting canyon road, bouncing over uneven pavement, the world outside blurring past. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. It was still there, not running, not chasing, just watching. And then I saw something worse. I had been on the canyon road for what felt like hours. I should have reached the highway by now. But every mile I drove, the same signs kept appearing, over and over. Their messages kept changing. Keep driving. It's not behind you. It's inside. Don't blink. I tightened my grip on the wheel, trying to shut them out. I knew if I kept looking, my mind would shatter under the weight of what they were telling me. But the signs wouldn't let me ignore them. They moved. Even when I wasn't looking, I could hear them. The grinding screech of metal shifting, the whisper of warped letters crawling across their surface. At one point, I passed a speed limit sign that read 55 miles per hour. I blinked. Suddenly it read, "Run," and then the headlights flickered. For half a second, everything went dark. The road, the signs, and when the lights came back, something was standing in the middle of the road. The standing figure. I screamed. My reflexes kicked in, my hands yanking the wheel to the side. The tires shrieked against the pavement as the RV swerved wildly, barely missing the figure. For a split second, I got a closer look. It wasn't the same faceless thing I'd seen before. This one was different. It was me, or at least it looked like me, until I noticed its mouth was too wide, its eyes too hollow, its skin rippling like the melting metal of the road signs. Then the headlights flickered again. Total darkness. And this time, when they came back, the figure was in the passenger seat. I felt something cold brush against my arm. My stomach dropped. I didn't look, didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, in a voice identical to mine, it whispered, "Wrong turn. The roads don't lead anywhere." I nearly crashed the RV trying to get away. I had no idea where I was driving anymore. The road didn't make sense. It twisted in impossible ways, turning when it shouldn't, looping back when it never should have been able to. The same signs appeared again. I passed a mile marker that read, "Clifton 2 miles. My stomach twisted. That wasn't possible. I had already passed this sign over 30 minutes ago. And then I passed it again, and again, and then a minute later, the sign changed before my eyes. Clifton 99 miles. I slammed my fist against the dashboard. This isn't real. I grabbed my phone, desperate, my fingers fumbling as I tried to check for any kind of signal. Nothing. No GPS. No bars. And then, my phone screen started glitching. The letters on my home screen warped, stretching and shifting, just like the road signs outside. For a moment, it was just static, black pixels crawling across the display. Then a new message appeared. "Look behind you. No escape." I dropped the phone. I wasn't going to look. I wouldn't give whatever this thing was the satisfaction. I gritted my teeth, knuckles white on the wheel, and pushed the gas pedal as hard as I could. The RV lurched forward. The engine groaned under the strain, the tires rattling over the warped asphalt. I wasn't stopping. Not for anything. But the road had other plans. The next sign loomed ahead, glowing in the night like an exit ramp. I squinted, dread crawling through me. It didn't list a town. Didn't give directions. It only said one thing. Final stop. And then, the road disappeared. 1 second it was there. The next, I was falling. I opened my mouth to scream. But the world went black before any sound could escape. I was still falling. The moment the RV's tires left the ground, the world collapsed around me. I didn't feel weightless. I felt like I was being dragged downward, yanked by unseen hands into a chasm that shouldn't exist. The headlights flickered violently, illuminating something impossible beneath me. There was no canyon floor, no road, just an endless sprawl of road signs, stacked, warped, and melting together like a graveyard of twisted metal. The words on them were shifting, crawling, spelling things I didn't want to see. No escape. Welcome back. You were warned. You never left. I wrenched the steering wheel uselessly as the RV plummeted, my body slamming against the seatbelt, ribs crushing under the pressure. The radio crackled, and then a voice spoke. A horrible voice. My voice. You should have followed the signs. The crash that never happens. I braced for impact. for the devastating shatter of metal against metal, for pain, for death, but it never came. Instead, I was somewhere else. The RV wasn't falling anymore. It was parked. The seatbelt was still wrapped around me, my hands still gripping the wheel. But outside the window, the canyon was gone. The warped road signs were gone. And in their place was a gas station, not a normal one. It looked wrong, like an imitation of what a gas station should be. Its lights too bright, its colors slightly off, its windows too dark. But the worst part? I recognized it. I had stopped here before. Hours ago. Maybe days ago. No, that's not possible. I left this place. I forced myself to breathe, wiping sweat from my forehead. Think. Everything looked the same as before. The flickering neon sign, the single pump, the cracked asphalt. But then my stomach twisted. There was something new. A road sign. Just outside the station. It was still melting, the letters shifting, twisting, until they finally settled into something legible. I didn't want to read it. I already knew what it would say. Start over? A sick feeling pooled in my gut. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine wouldn't start. The air inside the RV felt thicker, pressing against my skin. And then, I saw it. The figure. Standing right outside my window. The road that loops. I slammed my fist against the ignition, trying to force the RV to start. The figure outside didn't move. It was watching. Waiting. I didn't want to look at it directly, but I caught enough details in my peripheral vision to know it wasn't human. It had a head, but no face. A body, but it didn't cast a shadow. It didn't breathe. And worst of all, it was wearing my clothes. I turned away, heart hammering. Not real. Not real. I checked the gas gauge. Full. That wasn't possible. I should have been nearly empty after all that driving. And then something slammed against the windshield. My entire body jerked back as a massive road sign suddenly crashed down in front of the RV, its post bending and twisting as the words warped across its surface. It no longer said, "Start over." Now it said, "Turn around." I froze. Then the figure outside moved. One step forward, then another. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I lunged for the passenger door, flung it open, and ran. Inside the gas station. The second I stepped inside the gas station, the air changed. It was too quiet, not in a peaceful way, in a way that felt wrong. The clerk at the counter wasn't moving. His back was turned, his posture unnatural, as if someone had posed him there like a mannequin. I took a slow step forward, my breath coming in uneven bursts. "Hey!" I called, my voice hoarse. "I need help." The clerk twitched. I stopped dead. Then, in a voice that wasn't his own, he said, "You already know what you have to do." I took a step back. "What?" The clerk didn't turn around, but something behind me did. I felt it move. I whipped around, and there it was, the figure, inside, between me and the door. I scrambled backward, knocking over a rack of chips, my pulse thundering in my ears. The gas station's fluorescent lights flickered, casting impossible shadows across the floor. And the road signs were here too, hanging from the ceiling, stacked against the walls. They were dripping, their letters warping, shifting, forming one final message. Take the road or take its place. My breath hitched. Take its place. I turned to the clerk, my mouth dry. What does that mean? The clerk's head snapped back, twisting at an unnatural angle. And then he smiled. You know, the final decision. I was trapped. The figure blocked the door. The clerk wasn't human, and the road signs wanted something from me. My mind raced. What did they mean, take the road or take its place? And then it hit me. I turned back to the figure. Its shape, its clothes, its lack of a face. It was me. Or rather, it was whoever had taken my place last time. The last driver. The last person who ignored the signs. I wasn't the first. And if I didn't do something, I wouldn't be the last. The road wasn't a place. It was a cycle. A loop. The signs weren't warnings, they were rules. And I had broken them. Now I had a choice. Stay here. Become the next faceless figure. Or take the road again. The escape that isn't. I didn't hesitate. I shoved past the clerk, sprinting toward the door, past the figure, and back into the driver's seat of the RV. The moment I shut the door, the engine roared to life. I didn't question it. I didn't stop to think. I floored the gas. The tires screeched, the RV tearing out of the parking lot, the gas station vanishing behind me. The road signs lined the path ahead, shifting, melting, warning. But I didn't stop. I drove, as fast and as far as I could. And for a moment, I thought I was free, until I saw the next sign. A fresh one I had never seen before. It simply read, "Welcome back." And up ahead, I saw the gas station again. The return to the beginning. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was. The same gas station. The same warped road sign. The same feeling of sinking dread. The RV's tires screeched as I slammed the brakes. The smell of burnt rubber filled the air, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I stared at the glowing neon lights of the gas station, flickering just like before. My heart hammered against my ribs. No, this isn't real. This isn't happening. I turned my head, scanning the road behind me. Only there was no road behind me. The darkness stretched, an infinite black void where asphalt should have been. I was trapped. Again. I whispered under my breath. No, no, no. Then, I saw the road sign shifting again. The letters bled, melting across its surface before finally solidifying into a single chilling message. No exit. The figure that waits. Something moved near the gas station entrance. I didn't want to look. I already knew what it was. But I looked anyway. The figure stood just outside the door, still wearing my clothes, still lacking a face, still waiting. I tried to breathe, tried to think, but the only thing running through my mind was the overwhelming realization that this moment, had already happened. Had happened before, and would happen again. The road's choice. I turned away, gripping the wheel. Maybe if I ignored it, maybe if I refused to play the game. But then the radio crackled. A sharp, static hiss, loud enough to make me flinch. Then a voice. My voice. You have to make a choice. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What choice? I whispered. The voice on the radio laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Not a mocking one. But something worse. It was a laugh of understanding. Of resignation. You already know. I shut my eyes. Because I did know. 2 doors, no escape. There were only 2 options. Take the road. Or take its place. The figure outside the gas station. That had been someone before me. Someone who had ignored the signs. Someone who had driven too far. And now it was their turn to leave. And my turn to stay. Unless I drove. Unless I kept going. Unless I let someone else end up here. My stomach churned, while rising in my throat. It was a horrible choice. But was it even a choice at all? I reached for the keys. The endless road. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. The road ahead was waiting. The signs flickered, their messages shifting as I floored the gas. Don't look back. You can still run. Just keep driving. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't check if the figure was gone. Because deep down I knew. It was. It was waiting for the next traveler. The road was endless. I would keep driving. I would try to escape. But sooner or later, the signs would change again. And I'd be right back here. The next time you're driving at night, pay attention to the road signs. If they change when you're not looking, if they seem to be melting, if they start spelling out things meant just for you, turn around. Because once you're on the melting road, you don't get to choose where it ends. It chooses for you. Next story is, I don't remember exactly when I first heard the voice. It was sometime past midnight, and I had been driving for hours, my eyes half-lidded, the dull ache of exhaustion setting in. The road stretched long and empty ahead of me, 2 faint white lines disappearing into the darkness. My headlights barely cut through the thick night air, the landscape around me reduced to indistinct silhouettes of trees and hills. I was alone, or at least I should have been. I reached for the radio out of habit, just to fill the silence. I hadn't turned it on all trip. Cell service was unreliable in these parts, and I had my music on my phone, but at that moment, I just wanted something familiar. The soft crackle of FM static filled the cabin as I lazily spun the dial, searching for anything to break the eerie quiet. That's when the station clicked on. A smooth, baritone voice, rich and steady, filled the RV speakers. And welcome back, Night Riders. You're tuned in to the only show that matters, the one that keeps you company when the rest of the world is asleep. This is the Endless Radio Show, and I'll be your guide tonight. Something about his voice sent a small shiver up my spine. It was too crisp, too clear, like he was sitting right next to me, speaking directly into my ear. But it was also strangely comforting, like an old-fashioned radio host from decades ago. I relaxed slightly, adjusting in my seat. Maybe this was just a local late-night show, one of those strange, independent stations you only catch in the middle of nowhere. The host continued. It's late, isn't it? I bet you've been driving for a long time. The road can feel endless at this hour, can it? Almost like it's stretching just for you. My fingers tensed around the wheel. That was oddly specific. I shook my head, exhaling. Maybe he just knew his audience. Truckers, insomniacs, night wanderers, people like me. Still, something about it unsettled me. I let the radio play as I drove. The host, who never gave his name, kept talking in that same deep, mesmerizing voice. He told stories, weaving tales of lonely highways, strange roadside encounters, and phantom hitchhikers. Each one had an eerie, almost dreamlike quality, like they weren't just stories but warnings. Between the tales, he played music. Old songs mostly, crooning jazz numbers, ghostly blues, and slow, mournful ballads. Tracks I'd never heard before but somehow felt familiar, like half-forgotten memories resurfacing. Every now and then, he would pause and say something that sent a ripple of unease through me. "You've been driving for a while now, haven't you? Getting tired? You should pull over soon." I frowned. That was weird. I reached for my phone, thinking I'd look up the station. Maybe it was a regional thing, some underground broadcast. No service. I sighed. Figures. Middle of nowhere. I turned back to the radio and noticed something odd. There were no call signs. No ads. No station identification. Just him. That was impossible. Every radio station had to identify itself, at least occasionally. But the endless radio show didn't. It was just an endless stream of stories and songs, as if it had no beginning or end. I tried changing the station. The dial clicked, static hissed, but when the next station came through, it was still his voice. "Tisk TSK. Trying to leave already? We were just getting to the good part." My breath hitched. I stared at the radio. Had I imagined that? I turned the knob again. Different frequency, same voice. A hollow chill crept up my spine. I turned the radio off. The silence felt heavier now, pressing in on me like a thick fog. I tried to push the weirdness out of my mind. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was some kind of weird atmospheric interference, or the station was bleeding over onto multiple frequencies. I focused on the road. The darkness outside felt absolute, my headlights carving out a small, fragile tunnel of visibility. There were no road signs, no mile markers. Just the endless stretch of blacktop and the whisper of the wind against the RV's frame. Then, the radio turned itself back on. "Ah, there you are. Thought we lost you for a second." My stomach twisted. I reached for the knob, twisting it off again, harder this time. A beat of silence. Then, "You can't just shut me out, you know." I slammed on the brakes. The RV skidded slightly before coming to a stop in the middle of the empty road. My heart was hammering, my breath shallow. This wasn't interference. This wasn't normal. The radio had turned on by itself, and it was talking to me. I hesitated, then slowly reached for the volume dial. I turned it up just enough to hear the voice again. Now, don't be like that. It's just you and me out here. No sense in being rude." I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping the wheel. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe a pirate radio broadcast messing with travelers. That had to be it. "You don't believe that, do you?" I went cold. I didn't say anything. I hadn't even thought anything clearly, just vague, scrambling thoughts of denial. And yet, it knew. It knew. I pressed the gas pedal, trying to shake the eerie feeling. Maybe if I just kept moving, kept driving, I could put distance between me and whatever this was. The road stretched ahead, empty as ever. I checked the clock on the dashboard. 2:47 a.m. That wasn't right. I had checked earlier, and it had been 2:47 a.m. then too. I checked my phone. No signal. I glanced back at the road, suddenly feeling sick. How long had I been driving? How long had I been listening? The radio host chuckled. "Oh, don't worry. Time moves differently here." I felt a sharp spike of dread. Here? Where was here? The realization crept in like an icy fog. I didn't know where I was anymore. I tried to think back to the last town I had passed, the last gas station, the last road sign. But nothing came to mind. Had there even been a last town? Had there been a beginning to this drive? The thought made my stomach turn. The radio host sighed, almost wistfully. "It's all right. Just keep driving. Listen to my voice. Everything will be just fine." I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. I needed to get out of here. Wherever here was. Then, for the first time, I heard something new through the speakers. A different voice. Faint, crackling, like a distant signal barely coming through. A woman's voice. Hello? Is anyone listening?" I froze. The host clicked his tongue, amused. "Ah, looks like we have our first caller of the night." I stared at the radio, feeling my skin prickle with cold dread. This was wrong. This was all so wrong. And yet, I reached for the dial, and I turned it up. One, a voice lost in the static. The woman's voice crackled through the speakers, warped by static. Hello, can anyone hear me? It was distant, faint, almost like a whisper cutting through an ocean of white noise. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My pulse thudded in my ears. The radio host chuckled softly. Now, let's not get too excited. It's rude to interrupt, you know. The woman's voice stuttered, then grew desperate. Please, if you can hear me, you have to. Click. The radio cut out. The silence was so absolute it felt deafening. I stared at the dashboard, my breath shallow. What the hell was that? I reached out, hesitating before turning the volume knob. The host's voice returned, smooth and unbothered. Apologies, listeners. Looks like we had a bit of interference. But don't worry, we're still here. We're always here. I swallowed, trying to wet my dry throat. Who was she? Where had she been calling from? More importantly, how had she even called in? I forced myself to keep driving. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my brain was making things weirder than they really were. I glanced at the gas gauge. Half a tank. Enough to keep going for a while. I checked my phone again. No service. Of course. I sighed, refocusing on the road. The highway was still empty, the darkness swallowing everything outside the reach of my headlights. No signs. No exits. Just an endless stretch of pavement. That uneasy feeling in my gut twisted deeper. Then, my headlights caught something up ahead. A billboard. I squinted as I approached. The metal frame was rusted, the paint peeling. But the words were clear. Tune in. That was it. Just those 2 words. No station number. No brand. Just tune in. I frowned. That couldn't have been there before. Could it? The RV passed it, and for the first time in a while, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a second, I could swear the billboard had changed. Instead of tune in, the words now read, Stay on air. I blinked hard. Looked again. Nothing. It was gone. Just an empty stretch of road behind me. I tried to ignore the creeping anxiety in my chest. Maybe I needed sleep. Maybe I'd been driving for too long. I turned the volume down, not off, just down. The host continued. You ever feel like the road isn't letting you go? I went still. Like no matter how far you drive, it just loops. My hands tightened on the wheel. Some roads are like that, you know. Some places don't want to be left behind. I stared at the highway ahead. It did feel the same. The trees, the pavement, even the cracks in the road, unchanging. I shook my head, exhaling. Coincidence. Just a creepy coincidence. Then the host chuckled. It's not a coincidence. I slammed on the brakes. The RV skidded slightly before coming to a stop. I sat there, breathing hard. No way. No way he had just said that, responded to my thought. That was impossible. I turned the radio off. The silence was suffocating. I drove in silence for the next 20 minutes. Or at least, I thought it was 20 minutes. The clock on the dashboard still read 2:47 a.m. I didn't look at it again. The radio stayed off. But then, a sharp burst of static filled the RV. I jumped, nearly swerving off the road. The radio had turned itself back on, and the woman's voice was back. Listen to me. Her words broke into garbled static. You can't keep driving. He won't let you. My hands were slick with sweat. Who is she talking about? Who wouldn't let me leave? The host sighed as if annoyed. I told you not to interrupt. The static cut out. Her voice was gone. The host chuckled softly. Apologies, listeners. Some guests just don't know when to leave. I swallowed hard. I drove faster. I didn't know where I was going anymore. I just wanted to get somewhere. A town. A gas station. A sign. Anything. Then up ahead. Headlights. Relief flooded my chest. Another car. I flicked my high beams. A signal. The car responded. 2 flashes. I exhaled, shoulders relaxing. But as we got closer, my relief curdled. The car wasn't another traveler. It was me, my RV, driving straight toward me. I swerved hard, yanking the wheel as my tires screeched. The other me did the same. For a split second, our headlights aligned. And I saw myself, not just my RV, myself, sitting behind the wheel. Eyes wide, face pale, mouth open like I was screaming. Then nothing. The other RV vanished. Just gone, like it had never been there. My hands trembled violently. My breath was coming too fast, too shallow. No, that wasn't real. That couldn't have been real. The radio crackled. The host sighed almost fondly. Ah, Looks like you're finally catching on. I stared at the radio, shaking. I didn't want to turn it up. Didn't want to hear what he had to say. But I did anyway. Slowly. The host's voice was calm, amused. You can keep driving if you want. But you won't get anywhere. I didn't respond. You've been here before. Haven't you? A shudder ran down my spine. No. No, I hadn't. Haven't you? My stomach twisted. I looked at the road ahead. At the trees. The pavement. The night sky. I looked at the time. 2:47 a.m. I looked at the gas gauge. Half a tank. Exactly the same. Exactly. The realization hit like ice water down my spine. I had been here before. I had never left. And I wasn't going to. The host chuckled again, warm and knowing. Welcome to the show. The static swallowed the silence. And I kept driving. I kept my foot on the gas, the headlights piercing through the never-ending stretch of highway. I was shaking. Not just from the cold. Not just from fear. But from something worse. Something I couldn't explain. I flicked my eyes toward the dashboard. 2:47 a.m. Still. The same time it had been for, what? Half an hour? An hour? Longer? I couldn't tell anymore. I glanced at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. The same as before. Exactly the same. No. That wasn't possible. I had been driving for miles. The fuel should have dropped. Even just a little. My breath quickened. I smacked the dashboard clock with the palm of my hand. 2:47 a.m. It didn't change. I reached for my phone, swiping at the screen. The time there too. 2:47 a.m. The same notification sat at the top. No service. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to say it. But I had to. I wasn't moving forward. I reached for the radio knob. My hand hesitated. I didn't want to hear him again. Didn't want to hear that smooth, knowing voice laughing at me, playing with me like I was just another caller stuck in his twisted game. But the silence inside the RV was unbearable. I needed something, even if it scared me. I turned it on. SKKKKSHHHHHH. The static poured in like a crashing wave. At first, there was nothing. Just white noise, a distant hum. Then, whispers. Low, hushed voices buried deep in the static. I leaned in, gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't the host this time. It wasn't the woman either. It was someone else. Multiple people. I strained my ears, my heartbeat hammering. The words were distorted, chopped apart by the interference. But I could make out bits and pieces. You have to stop. He never lets go. Don't listen to him. I swallowed hard. I wasn't alone. But that didn't make me feel any better. Because if they were here, where were they speaking from? The air inside the RV grew heavy, pressing in around me like thick fog. Then, just as suddenly as they had come, the whispers stopped, replaced by a single voice, low, gruff, and it spoke directly to me. They lied. I sucked in a breath. The hair on my arm stood on end. The voice was new. Not the host. Not the woman. Not the whispers. Someone else entirely. And I knew I wasn't supposed to hear him. I flipped the radio off. I was done. I gripped the wheel, forcing myself to focus on the road. Just drive. Find a sign. A town. A gas station. Anything that proved I was still in the real world. But then, a chill crawled up my spine. I glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. There was someone sitting in the back of the RV. A figure. Dark. Motionless. Watching me. My chest clenched. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The figure sat in the dinette booth, its outline faint but undeniable. And the longer I stared, the more it shifted, like a shadow rippling underwater. I sucked in a shaky breath, forcing myself to turn my head. Look. See it with my own eyes. I twisted in my seat. Nothing. The dinette was empty. The air inside the RV felt different now. Thicker. Charged. I turned back to the road, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. But in the rearview mirror, the shadow was still there. I floored the gas pedal. The engine roared as the RV surged forward. I didn't care about the fuel anymore. Didn't care about anything but getting away. The trees blurred past in dark smears. The headlights cut through the black void ahead. I needed an exit. Something. Anything. Then, a road sign appeared in the distance. I exhaled hard, gripping the wheel. Thank God. I sped toward it, desperate to read what it said. The closer I got, the clearer the words became. And my stomach dropped. Tune in. The same words as before. No directions. No town name. Just tune in. I drove past it, and my gaze flicked to the rearview mirror. The sign had changed. Stay on air. I slammed on the brakes. The RV skidded, tires screeching. I stared at the sign in the distance, my pulse thundering. No way. That was impossible. I turned my head, looking behind me with my own eyes. The road was empty. The sign was gone. Just vanished. Like it had never been there. I turned back toward the windshield, and my stomach plummeted, because ahead of me, in the distance, another sign, identical to the last. Tune in. My breathing hitched. I had just driven past that, hadn't I? My fingers trembled as I turned the wheel. The RV drifted slightly, veering onto the shoulder. I needed to pull over, needed to think, but before I could, the radio crackled, and the host's voice came through. Calm, amused. Going somewhere? I reached for the knob, twisted it hard. The volume didn't budge. I turned it off completely, but the voice kept going. You're starting to understand, aren't you? My breath shuddered. I didn't respond. Didn't want to. You never really left. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tighter. Not true. That wasn't true. I had been driving. For miles. For hours. Hadn't I? I glanced at the clock. 2:47 a.m. Still. Unmoving. I shook my head. No. No. I pressed my foot on the brake, bringing the RV to a full stop. Then a knock. Soft. Rhythmic. Coming from the passenger side window. I turned my head slowly, and my heart stopped, because standing there was me, smiling, mouthing two words. Tune in. And behind him, stretching into the darkness, were dozens of others. Copies. Versions of me, all smiling, all mouthing the same two words. The radio host chuckled softly. You were always part of the show. The static roared, and the world went dark. I stomped the gas pedal. The engine roared, the RV surging forward. I didn't care anymore. Didn't care about the fuel, the time loop, the whispers and the static. I just needed to go, to find a way out. To prove to myself that I wasn't stuck in some impossible nightmare. The road stretched on, never-ending. My eyes flicked to the dashboard clock. 2:47 a.m. Unmoving, unchanging, like the world outside the RV had stopped breathing. I swallowed hard. I needed to think. I needed to. Then, in the distance, a sign. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles turning white. Please be different. Please say something, anything, that makes sense. The headlights washed over it, and my stomach plummeted. Tune in. I clenched my teeth. No, not again. I sped past it, but in the rearview mirror, the sign had changed. Stay on air. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I had driven for miles. For hours. Hadn't I? My throat felt tight. I wasn't moving forward. I wasn't going anywhere. Then, the radio clicked on. At first, just static. A low, crackling hum filling the RV. Then, the voice. His voice. Smooth. Amused. Like he'd been waiting for me to brake. Welcome back, driver. My grip tightened on the wheel. Turn it off. No response. The air in the RV felt thicker. Like I wasn't alone. I reached for the knob. But before I could touch it, don't. I froze. His voice wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was closer. Inside the RV. I turned my head slowly, and my blood ran cold. Because sitting in the passenger seat was him, the host. Legs crossed. Smiling. Like he'd been riding with me this whole time. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The host leaned back, tapping the dashboard lightly with his fingers. You're stubborn, he mused. Most people break a lot sooner. I couldn't answer. Couldn't find my voice. His grin widened. Don't worry. I get it. This is a lot to take in. He gestured toward the windshield. Go ahead. Keep driving. See if that helps. I didn't move. Didn't dare. His expression darkened. His eyes locked onto mine. Drive. My hands obeyed before my mind could process. I pressed the gas. The RV lurched forward. He smiled again. There we go. That's better. His voice was warm. Too warm. Like he wasn't just talking to me. Like he was talking through me. He folded his hands together. So, he said, tilting his head, let's talk about your first time tuning in. I clenched my jaw. I don't remember. His smile didn't falter. Oh, but you do. He pointed toward the radio. I'm always here. You're the one who turned the dial. I shook my head. No, I. Then the radio changed. No static. No eerie whispers. Just a recording. And I recognized my own voice. What the hell is this station? My blood went cold. It was me. From earlier tonight. The recording continued. There's no station name, no frequency, nothing. I reached for the volume knob, twisting frantically. Nothing changed. The recording played on. Hello? Who's there? I sucked in a breath. I remembered saying that. But this wasn't then. This was now. This was happening again. The host chuckled. See, he said. You tuned in. You always do. I swallowed hard. No. He leaned in, lowering his voice. You always will. The radio crackled again. Another voice joined the static. A woman. The same one I had heard earlier. Please, she begged. Please, you have to listen to me. I gritted my teeth. Who is she? I demanded. The host leaned back, stretching his arms. Oh, you know her. I shook my head. I don't. He raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? The static deepened. And then, the woman's voice spoke again. I don't know how long I've been here. My breath hitched. Because this time, I recognized it. It wasn't just any woman. It was my sister. I grabbed the radio, my hands shaking. Emily? Silence. Then, a soft, ragged breath. Michael? My stomach dropped. Emily, where are you? What the hell is going on? Her voice cracked. He won't let me go. I turned to the host, rage bubbling in my chest. What is this? I shouted. What the hell did you do? He sighed, rubbing his temple like I was annoying him. Michael, he muttered. You're still thinking about this all wrong. I clenched my fists. He smiled. Tell me, he said. How long have you been driving? I opened my mouth. Then stopped. My thoughts froze. How long had I been driving? An hour? 2? More? I couldn't remember. I couldn't even tell if I was tired. Like I had been here forever. The host's grin widened. There it is, he whispered. The realization. The fear. That deep, gnawing horror. The radio crackled again, and I heard Emily scream. I snapped. I lunged for the host, grabbing his shirt. Let her go! I roared. He didn't resist. Didn't fight back. Just smiled. Then he leaned in, and whispered 3 words into my ear. 3 words that sent ice through my veins. You never left. I froze. The RV lurched. I whipped my head toward the windshield, and my blood curdled. The road ahead. It wasn't a road anymore. It was blackness. A void stretching into forever, like the entire world had vanished. Swallowed up by the signal, and I was falling into it. The host chuckled. This is my favorite part. I gasped, my body tipping forward. Into the dark. I was falling. Not in the way you trip or tumble. Not even like a dream where you jolt awake just before hitting the ground. This was endless. Like gravity had abandoned me, and I was sinking into a void. The RV was gone. The road was gone. The host's voice was the only thing left. Welcome to the next phase, Michael. His voice wasn't coming from anywhere. It was everywhere. It wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket, pressing into my skull. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Then, the radio crackled, and the world snapped back into place. The loop begins again. I gasped, jerking upright. I was in the RV. My hands clenched the steering wheel. My foot hovered over the gas pedal. The headlights carved a dim, narrow path through the darkness ahead. No host. No screaming. Just silence. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing, shaking, trying to remember what the hell had just happened. Then, the radio clicked on, and we're back. My stomach twisted. I reached for the knob, but stopped. Something was wrong. Outside, in the headlights, a sign. It hadn't been there before. I swallowed hard and leaned forward. The letters gleamed in the dim glow. Tune in. A chill crawled up my spine. I gritted my teeth. No, I wasn't playing this game again. I slammed the RV into reverse, tires screeching, and then the road shifted, like it had come alive. The asphalt rippled like water. The headlights flickered, and in the rearview mirror, another sign. Stay on air. My breath hitched. No. The radio host chuckled. You can try, Michael. His voice was smooth, almost teasing. But you're always here. The voices that shouldn't be there. Then, a new sound. A familiar one. The radio shifted frequencies, and I heard Emily's voice. Michael, please don't leave me. A cold sweat dripped down my back. I twisted the volume knob, desperate to shut it off. It didn't budge. He won't let me go. I squeezed my eyes shut. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Then, a different voice. One I hadn't heard before. A man. His tone was shaky. Terrified. "Oh God, I've been here for so long, please, if someone can hear me." Static swallowed him whole. Then, another voice. A woman. "I don't remember when I started driving. Is anyone out there?" "Hello." My pulse pounded in my ears. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. These weren't just random callers. These were people like me. People who had tuned in. Who had listened too long. Who had never left. The host sighed. "You never did understand, did you?" The radio crackled. And suddenly, I heard my own voice. The warning from myself. "What the hell is this station?" My stomach lurched. The voice on the radio. It was me. Not past me. Not a memory. Future me. "If you're listening, get out. Now. Before it's too late." My blood turned to ice. I tried to speak, but the voice kept going. "Don't trust him. Don't listen. Don't." The signal cut out. Silence. Then, the host laughed. A slow, cruel chuckle. "Oops," he said. "Seems like you almost figured it out." I trembled. What the hell is this?" The host sighed. "Like I was just another disappointment. This is the show, Michael." His voice wrapped around me like a snake. "And you're the latest episode." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The road stretched into nothing. The radio hummed softly. The voices whispered beneath the static. And I understood. There was no winning. No escaping. I had only two choices. Keep driving. Or turn the radio off. The host chuckled. "You already know what happens if you tune out." I gritted my teeth. I reached for the knob. And twisted it. The radio went silent. For the first time in what felt like eternity. No static. No voices. Just quiet. I exhaled. The road was still there. The headlights still cut through the dark. I pressed my foot on the gas. The RV moved forward. And for a moment, I thought, I did it. I escaped. Then, in the distance, a road sign appeared. As my headlights washed over it, my heart stopped. The words had changed. And this time, they were different. "New host, Michael." My breath hitched. The radio clicked on, and I heard my own voice. "Welcome back, listeners." The realization crashed over me. The horror sank deep. I was never leaving, because the show must go on. Next story. I pulled off the main highway just after dusk, the neon vacancy sign of Evergreen Pines RV Park flickering in the distance. My shoulders ached from hours behind the wheel, and my eyelids felt like sandpaper. I needed to rest. I'd been on the road for nearly a week now, bouncing from one cheap campsite to another, avoiding overpacked tourist traps. A small, quiet park off the beaten path was exactly what I was looking for. And yet, something about Evergreen Pines felt off the moment I turned onto its narrow, tree-lined road. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled toward the office, and my headlights washed over a row of parked RVs, all dark and silent. No porch lights. No campfires. No movement. Most RV parks had a sense of life. Kids playing, couples grilling, dogs barking. This place? It felt like a waiting room. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just the hour. Maybe everyone had already turned in. I killed the engine, pocketed my keys, and stepped out. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and somewhere deep in the woods, a single owl hooted. But beyond that, silence. Too much silence. The office was a small wooden shack, its porch light buzzing with moths. A rusted bell hung over the door, jingling softly as I stepped inside. The man behind the counter didn't look up right away. He was hunched over a logbook, his hand moving sluggishly as he scratched something onto the page. "Evening," I said. He glanced up, eyes dull, like someone who hadn't slept in days. His name tag read Frank. "You're alone?" His voice was hoarse. "Yeah." Frank's gaze drifted toward the window, like he was checking for something outside. Then he nodded. $30. Cash only. That wasn't unusual for small parks like this, so I pulled out my wallet. He took the bills with fingers that felt too cold when they brushed mine. "There's plenty of spots," he said. "Take any open one." I glanced at the guest book. The most recent name had been scratched out, ink smeared across the page. I swallowed hard. "Looks like you don't get many visitors." Frank smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Nah, just quiet folks passing through." Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. I nodded, taking my change, and turned to leave. Just as my hand touched the door, Frank spoke again. "Don't wander after dark." I froze. His tone was light, almost casual. But there was something under it, something I didn't like. I forced a laugh. "Why's that?" "Bears." Frank didn't blink. "Just stay in your RV." A shiver traced my spine. I gave him a small nod and walked out into the night. I pulled my RV into a spot near the tree line, far enough from the office that I'd have some privacy. As I stepped out to connect the power, I noticed something odd. The space next to mine was completely empty, but the ground had fresh tire marks. I knelt down, running my fingers over the dirt. Still soft, like a vehicle had been there hours ago. Yet there was no sign of another camper. My stomach twisted. Maybe someone had just left earlier today. That was possible, right? I shook it off and finished setting up. By the time I climbed back inside and locked the door, my exhaustion had caught up with me. The bed felt like heaven. I didn't even bother setting an alarm. I wasn't sure what woke me. Maybe a noise. Maybe a shift in the air. All I knew was that I was suddenly awake, staring at the ceiling. The RV was too quiet. Even in remote parks, you could hear something: wind, insects, maybe an owl. But here? Nothing. I checked my phone. 3:12 a.m. I sat up slowly, listening. Then I heard it. A low rustling sound, like footsteps in dead leaves. It was coming from outside. I held my breath. The footsteps paused, then continued, circling my RV. Every muscle in my body locked up. I wasn't alone. I slid out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and crept toward the window. With one finger, I gently pulled back the curtain. Nothing. I squinted through the dark, my breath fogging up the glass. There, movement just past the tree line. A shadow, tall, watching. Then, bang. I jumped. The sound had come from the empty RV spot next to mine. I whipped my head around. My stomach dropped. The space that had been empty before, now there was an RV there. I stared, my pulse hammering. That wasn't there when I parked. And yet, there it was, completely still, its windows black, engine silent. Like it had always been there. A lump formed in my throat. Had I missed it before? No. Something was wrong. I backed away from the window, my hands ice cold. A whisper of movement caught my ear again. Those slow, crunching footsteps. Only this time, they were coming closer. I dove into bed and pulled the covers over my head, every inch of my body screaming to stay hidden. I barely breathed. And then, silence. Minutes crawled by. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. But eventually, exhaustion won over terror, and sleep pulled me under. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the windows, and for a moment, I thought I'd imagined it all. Until I stepped outside. The RV that appeared in the night. Gone. Not just moved. Gone. No tire tracks. No signs anyone had ever been there. I turned, heart racing, scanning the lot. Frank stood by the office, watching me. His face was unreadable. A chill crept through me. I forced a casual nod and walked toward the bathrooms, pretending everything was normal. But my gut told me something I didn't want to believe. I wasn't the only one who had seen something last night. Frank knew, and he wasn't telling me. A fading trail. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty RV space. No tire tracks. No sign of movement. Just an untouched patch of dirt where, less than 6 hours ago, a full-sized vehicle had been sitting. I ran a hand through my hair, forcing myself to think rationally. Maybe I was misremembering. Maybe I'd been groggy last night, and the RV had never been there to begin with. Except, I knew that wasn't true. The footsteps circling my RV. The sound of something shifting in the night. The way I'd stared right at that dark shape through the window. I swallowed hard, forcing my breathing to steady. The last thing I wanted was to freak myself out over nothing. I took another glance toward the office. Frank was still watching me. He hadn't moved. That uneasy feeling curled in my stomach again. I turned and made my way toward the bathroom, telling myself I'd feel better after a shower and some fresh air. The bathroom building was small, wooden, with a single light buzzing above the door. I pushed inside, feeling the stale humidity hit me. The first stall was open, its door hanging slightly off the hinges. Damp footprints led from the showers to the sinks. Someone else had been here recently. But as I glanced around, every stall was empty. I frowned, checking the footprints again. They led from the showers, but never left. A chill crept up my spine. I shook my head, forcing a laugh under my breath. What the hell was wrong with me? I was seeing ghosts and footprints now. I went to the sink, splashed some water on my face, and took a deep breath. I just needed a good meal and some daylight. I finished up quickly and walked back to my RV. As I climbed inside, I caught a flicker of movement in my side mirror. A figure, standing just beyond the tree line. I turned my head to look. Gone. My chest tightened. Maybe it had been a shadow, a trick of the morning light. Maybe. But as I closed the door, I realized something. The ground outside the trees looked disturbed, like someone had been standing there for a long time, watching. I forced myself to focus on breakfast, trying to shake the creeping dread in my stomach. As I sat at the tiny table, flipping through my phone, I heard the distant rumble of an engine. I looked up. A blue RV was pulling into the lot, kicking up dust as it slowed near the office. My chest loosened a little. I wasn't alone. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, blonde hair tied back, sunglasses perched on her head. She adjusted her bag, then walked into the office. A minute later, she came back out, glanced around, then got back into her RV and pulled into a spot 2 spaces down from mine. I had a neighbor now. For some reason, that made me feel better. I decided to introduce myself later. Maybe getting a read on another guest would help me figure out if I was just overthinking things. That night, I made sure to lock every door and window before settling in. I told myself I'd just sleep through the night. No paranoia. No listening for noises. But sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up. I don't know why. The RV was silent. No footsteps, no strange noises. But my chest was tight with dread. I rolled onto my side and peeked through the blinds. My heart stopped. The blue RV was gone. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. No, that wasn't right. I stared at the spot where it had been. There was no sign it had ever been there. No tire tracks. No leftover trash. No dent in the ground from where a heavy vehicle had been parked. Nothing. I sat up, my pulse hammering. Had she left in the middle of the night? Without even using the bathroom? Without saying anything? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Something was very, very wrong with this place. I barely slept the rest of the night. By the time the sun rose, my nerves were shot. I needed to leave. I pulled on my jacket and stepped outside. The air was still, cold despite the sun. I took a deep breath and headed toward the office. Frank was inside, writing in the guest book. I tried to keep my voice steady. Hey, the woman in the blue RV. Did she check out last night? Frank's pen froze. Slowly, he looked up at me. The blue RV? I nodded. He frowned. I didn't check in a blue RV. My stomach turned to ice. I took a step closer. I saw her. Yesterday. She pulled in. Parked 2 spots down from me. Frank just stared. Sir, his voice was slow. Careful. You're the only guest who's been here since Sunday. My pulse throbbed in my ears. No, that wasn't true. I had seen her. I had heard her engine. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Frank shut the guest book and exhaled. I think, he said, voice measured, you should leave. A sharp chill raced down my spine. I swallowed. Yeah, I think you're right. He nodded once. Be gone before dark. I turned and walked out of the office, my mind racing. The footprints in the bathroom. The missing RV in the night. The woman who was here, but now never existed. I needed to get out of here. Now. I hurried back toward my RV, my hands already fumbling for the keys. I stopped short. My blood turned to ice. The blue RV was back, sitting in the exact same spot. My head spun. I stared at it, breath coming fast and shallow. This wasn't possible. I had seen it vanish. I took a step closer. The windows were black. No movement inside. Something was wrong. The door to the RV creaked open. I froze. A hand gripped the edge of the doorway. Slowly, a figure stepped out. My stomach lurched. It was the woman. Same blonde hair, same sunglasses. But her face was blank. Her expression completely void. She looked at me, but it didn't feel like she saw me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. A single trickle of blood ran from her nose. And then, she turned and walked into the trees. Just disappeared into the forest. I stood there, frozen in terror. She never came back. The forest swallows her whole. I didn't move. I couldn't. The woman in the blue RV had just walked into the woods, silent, unnatural, bleeding, and she never came back. I should have run after her. Called out. Done something. But my body wouldn't cooperate. The trees had swallowed her whole. And the silence that followed, it felt like the forest itself was waiting, watching. I took a slow step backward, eyes locked on the dark gap where she had disappeared. And then, a voice, right behind me. You okay, buddy? I jumped, heart slamming into my ribs. Frank stood at the entrance of the office, watching me with his usual unreadable expression. I turned back to the woods. The woman was still gone. I licked my lips, trying to steady my breath. "Did you see that?" Frank didn't answer right away. Then slowly he stepped forward. "What did you see?" His voice was too calm, too measured. I glanced back at the woods. My mind was screaming at me to get the hell out of here. But I needed answers. The woman in the blue RV. My voice was hoarse. She walked into the trees. She never came out. Frank stared at me. Then, something shifted in his expression. He looked tired, like this was something he'd seen 100 times before. "Listen to me, son." His voice was firm now, serious. "You leave. You don't look back. You don't ask questions." A cold weight settled in my chest. This wasn't just me losing my mind. Frank knew. My mouth felt dry. "What is this place?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked back inside the office, as if the conversation was already over. The impossible reflection. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, staring after him. Then I turned back to my RV. I needed to pack, get out before sunset. I climbed into the driver's seat and grabbed my keys. And that's when I saw it. In the rearview mirror, the blue RV. Except, the driver's side window was open, and the woman was sitting inside, staring directly at me. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head to look directly at her. The RV was empty. The driver's side window was closed. I snapped my gaze back to the mirror. She was still there. Her head tilted slightly, eyes wide, mouth just barely open. A trickle of blood ran from her nose in reverse, crawling upward instead of down. I slammed my foot on the gas. The RV lurched forward. Dust kicked up behind me as I sped down the gravel path toward the exit. I didn't care about checking out. I didn't care about Frank's warnings. I just needed to go. The road that led nowhere. The exit sign appeared up ahead. I could see the main road. The highway. A sharp breath of relief left me as I turned onto it. I was gone. No. I slammed on the brakes. My stomach twisted violently. The RV park entrance was right in front of me. I had just driven in a full circle. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my hands slick with sweat. My mind raced through rational explanations. Maybe I'd gotten turned around. Maybe I was in such a panic that I'd driven the wrong way. I checked the GPS on my phone. The map was blank. No roads. No towns. Just a single blinking dot. Me. Right in the center of nothing. I looked back up and nearly screamed. The woman was standing in front of my RV, right in the middle of the road. Her mouth was open wider now, too wide, like her jaw was unhinged. I slammed the car into reverse. I didn't care about the road. I just needed to get the hell away from her. The second I backed up, she moved. No, not moved. She blinked out of existence. Gone. Vanished in the same impossible way as before. I slammed my foot onto the gas, whipping the wheel, turning any direction but forward. The road looped. No matter which way I turned, no matter what road I took, I ended up back at the RV park entrance. Again, and again, and again. The guest book of the damned. I was trapped. I didn't know how. I didn't know why. But I knew that I wasn't leaving. Not unless I figured out what the hell was happening. So I did the one thing I didn't want to do. I turned the wheel and drove back toward the office. Frank was still inside. When I walked in, he barely glanced up. I placed my hands on the counter. "Tell me what's going on." He exhaled slowly, like he'd been expecting this. Then, without a word, he turned the guest book around and slid it toward me. I frowned. Pages and pages of names. Hundreds of them. Some of the entries were old. Like decades old. Frank tapped one of them. "Recognize it?" I scanned the page. My stomach plummeted. The blue RV woman. Her name was written there. But the date next to it. 1986. I took a shaky breath. She was here yesterday. Frank just shook his head. "She was here," he murmured, "a long time ago." I swallowed hard. What happened to her? Frank's gaze met mine. The same thing that happens to all of them. My blood ran cold. I flipped more pages. More names. More impossible dates. Every single guest. All still here. All trapped. A name caught my eye. My fingers trembled as I traced the ink. My name. The date? Tomorrow. The shadow at my door. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I turned and ran out of the office. The sky had darkened to a sickly gray. The air felt thicker. Wrong. I sprinted to my RV, practically diving inside. My hands shook violently as I locked the doors, closed every curtain. I needed to think. I needed to. Tap, tap, tap. A soft knock at my door. I went completely still. Tap, tap, tap. My stomach clenched. I reached out, pressing my fingers to the curtain. I hesitated, then slowly, just barely, peeled it back. My heart stopped. The woman stood at my door. Not outside. Inside. Her mouth grinned wide, split too far up her cheeks. Her eyes were completely black. And then, she reached toward me. The woman in the RV. She was inside. Not outside the door. Not standing in the misty dark beyond my RV windows. She was inside. Her body hovered inches above the ground, as if she were weightless. And that mouth, that horrific, splitting grin, stretched too far up her cheeks, revealing rows of blackened teeth. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Her head twitched. Then, in a voice that was somehow both a whisper and a scream, she said, "You checked in." Her grin widened, cracking the skin at the corners of her mouth. "But you never checked out." I did the only thing I could think of. I lunged for the door. My hands fumbled with the lock, slick with sweat, shaking so hard I could barely grip the handle. But before I could yank it open, a cold hand grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were wrong. Thin, too long, pressing into my skin like they were sinking inside it. I gasped, trying to pull away, but the harder I struggled, the deeper her fingers pressed into my arm. Like she was absorbing me. The pain was unreal, a burning, hollowing sensation, like my blood was being drained out of my skin and replaced with something else. Something wrong. I screamed. Then, bang! A deafening gunshot rang through the RV. The woman's head snapped back violently, her grip loosening just enough for me to rip myself free. I stumbled backward, my arm throbbing, my vision blurring, and I saw Frank, standing in the doorway, holding a shotgun. His face was twisted with something that looked like pure exhaustion. "Move," he said. I didn't think. I just ran. The forest that whispers. Frank dragged me through the dark. My legs barely worked, my heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Behind us, the woman let out a sound I will never, ever forget. A high, distorted shriek that didn't sound human. Like a radio signal cutting in and out. Like 1,000 screams layered over each other. I barely had time to register where we were running. The forest. The same dead, silent trees where I had last seen her before she disappeared. But this time, the trees were whispering. Not words. Just sounds. Like voices trapped beneath the bark, murmuring, shifting. I could feel them pressing inward. Like the forest was trying to swallow us. Frank suddenly skidded to a stop, gripping my arm. "We don't have much time," he said through gritted teeth. He turned to me. "You need to wake up." I froze. My chest heaved with ragged breaths. "What?" Frank's fingers dug into my shoulder. "This place. It's not real. It's not a park. It's not even land. It's a goddamn mouth." I just stared at him, my pulse roaring in my ears. "I've seen it happen again and again," he went on, his voice sharp with urgency. "People check in, and then..." He made a violent snapping motion with his fingers. "Gone. Like they had never existed." He turned to face the trees. "They always go into the woods," he murmured. "That's where they disappear." I swallowed hard. "Why are you still here?" He hesitated. Then finally he said, "Because I already disappeared." His voice was almost too soft to hear. My stomach dropped. Frank turned back to me, eyes shadowed with something unreadable. "This place doesn't let you leave," he said. "But sometimes it lets you forget. The park that remembers." The air shifted. Frank suddenly tensed, glancing behind us. I followed his gaze, and my blood ran cold. The trees weren't still anymore. They were moving, bending, twisting, growing closer in an impossible, shivering motion. "Shit," Frank muttered. I turned back to him, my voice barely a whisper. "What do we do?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then, his expression hardened. "I need you to go into the office," he said. I stared at him. "What?" Frank gripped my shoulder, forcing me to meet his eyes. "There's a book on the desk. The guest book. Rip your page out." The whispering in the trees grew louder. A low, insidious rustling, like something was about to break through. I felt my breath catch. "What happens if I do?" Frank's jaw clenched. "I don't know." But before I could say anything else, the forest screamed. Not the wind, not the trees, the forest itself. It was like the sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Frank shoved me. "Go! The office of names." I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the office. The next thing I knew, I was slamming through the door, lungs burning, hands shaking as I grabbed the guest book. The pages fluttered violently as I flipped through them. I found my name, tomorrow's date. Hands trembling, I grabbed the edge of the paper and ripped it out. The moment the page tore free, a deep, guttural howl ripped through the RV park. Like the whole place had just felt it. The book shuddered violently in my hands, its pages fluttering madly, then snapped shut with a sickening finality. I stumbled backward. The air felt thick, like something had shifted. Then, the lights in the office flickered, and everything went black. The vanishing RV park. I woke up behind the wheel of my RV. The sun was rising. A soft, golden light filtered through the windshield. The gravel road stretched out ahead of me, leading back to the highway. My heart stopped. I twisted in my seat. The RV park was gone. No office, no trees, no other campers, just an empty stretch of land, as if it had never existed at all. I turned back to the wheel, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Was it real? Had I dreamed it? Then, my hands froze, because there, on the seat beside me, was the page I had ripped out of the book. My name, the date, and beneath it, scrawled in fresh ink. You checked out, but it's still hungry. My breath hitched. I looked up at the empty stretch of land one last time, and then, without a second thought, I drove, as far as I could, as fast as I could, the road back to nowhere. I didn't stop driving. The highway stretched before me in a haze of early morning mist, the edges of the road blending into the fog like I was the only thing left in existence. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Every few seconds, my eyes darted to the passenger seat, to the torn page from the guest book. The words stared back at me in black, heavy ink. You checked out, but it's still hungry. I reached for it with unsteady fingers. The paper felt wrong, like it had weight more than it should, like it was waiting. A part of me wanted to throw it out the window, but a deeper, colder part of me whispered, "What if it follows you?" My stomach churned. I shoved the paper into the glove compartment and snapped it shut. Out of sight, but not out of mind. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but somehow the road didn't feel right. Something was off. The mile markers looked the same. The faded yellow lines down the middle of the road were identical. And yet, the longer I drove, the more it felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. The gas station that shouldn't exist. I drove for hours, or maybe just minutes. Time felt strange. It stretched and twisted, like a half-remembered dream. Then, out of the mist, a gas station appeared. A single, lonesome structure by the side of the road. My stomach twisted. It looked familiar. The red and white neon sign flickered overhead. Apex Gas. I had seen that sign before, in the RV park, but that was impossible. My breath came shallow as I pulled up to the pump. I needed gas. Needed to stop, just for a moment. But as I reached for the door handle, I hesitated. A shape moved inside the gas station. Behind the counter. A man. He was staring at me. I couldn't see his face clearly through the grimy glass, but there was something unnerving about the way he stood. Still, unmoving, like he had been waiting. A deep, icy dread curled in my chest. I left the engine running. When I stepped inside, a tiny bell overhead jingled, but the sound was distorted, like an old tape warping in the heat. The man behind the counter didn't blink, didn't move, didn't even breathe. I swallowed hard. "Morning," I said, my voice hoarse. No response. I took a step forward. Something about him looked off. His skin was too smooth, like plastic, like something was wearing him. Then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was Frank's. "Thought you checked out. The gas station knows my name." I froze. The air went thick, suffocating. The man Frank? The thing wearing Frank cocked his head slightly. His lips curled into a slow, unnatural smile. "You look lost," he said, in that voice that was familiar and wrong. I took a slow, unsteady step backward. I just need gas," I stammered. The smile widened. "Oh, you'll need more than that." Something rustled. Not in the store. Behind my eyes. A pressure, like something was trying to slip inside my skull. I stumbled back, shoving through the door. My pulse roared in my ears. The gas station seemed brighter now. Too bright. Like the world was overexposed, like I was inside a photograph. The man, not Frank, not human, watched me through the glass. Still smiling. Still waiting. I jumped into my RV and peeled out of the parking lot. The sign flickered. Apex Gas. Below it, new words blinked into existence. You checked out, but you can't leave. The loop that never ends. I drove. Faster this time. The highway stretched ahead, but my hands trembled on the wheel. I told myself it was fine, that I just needed to get away. Then, I saw it. The gas station. Up ahead, the same red and white neon sign. The same empty parking lot. The same man standing behind the counter. I slammed on the brakes, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. No, this wasn't right. I had just left. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It hadn't changed. The time was exactly the same as when I had pulled in the first time. I squeezed my eyes shut. I wasn't crazy. This wasn't real. I just had to keep driving. Just had to get further away. So I drove. Faster. Faster. The guest who never leaves. I passed the gas station again. And again. And again. Each time, the man behind the counter was still there. Each time, the sign changed. Welcome back. Still hungry? You can't leave. I slammed my fists on the wheel. No, I growled. No, I got out. I checked out. My voice didn't sound right. It was too layered. Like it was being spoken by someone else at the same time. I grabbed the glove compartment and ripped it open. The guest book page was still there, but it wasn't empty anymore. The ink had changed. A new line had appeared beneath my name. Checked in, 7:42 p.m. Checked out, not applicable. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. I turned to the side mirror and saw the RV parked behind me, waiting, like it had never left. Like I had never left. I wasn't on the highway anymore. I was back at the entrance. The neon office sign buzzed weakly in the night. My chest tightened. I turned back to the wheel, and Frank was in the passenger seat, grinning. "Welcome back," he whispered. I screamed. Then, the lights flickered. The engine died. The world blinked out. Final entry. The next morning, the RV park looked normal. The sun rose. The gravel shimmered with dew. Everything was still. But the office door was open. And inside, on the desk, the guest book lay waiting. Its pages flipped on their own, stopping at the newest entry. A single name. The same name that had tried to escape. Beneath it, fresh ink bloomed into existence. Checked in, 7:42 p.m. Checked out, not applicable. Hungry. And outside, the wind carried a voice. Faint. Distant. Endless. A whisper in the trees. You can check out, but you'll never leave. Next story. The drive begins. I don't know exactly when I started feeling like I wasn't the one in control. Maybe it was after the fourth or fifth time I second-guessed my own memory. Or maybe it was even earlier than that, back when I first noticed the GPS was speaking to me a little too personally. At first, it was just another road trip, the kind you take to clear your head. I had packed up my RV in a hurry, not giving myself much time to think about it. Just threw some essentials in the cabinets, stocked up on gas, and hit the road. I didn't even have a solid destination in mind. Just away. That was all I needed. The roads were quiet that evening, stretching out like dark veins across the landscape. I had always liked driving at night. It felt calmer, safer, like the rest of the world had gone to sleep and left the road all to me. The only sound was the hum of my tires against the asphalt, the occasional rustle of trees in the wind, and the soft, mechanical voice of the GPS. Continue for 72 miles. I barely even registered it. The voice was just background noise, something I had heard so many times before that it barely even registered in my mind. I had no reason to think anything was wrong. Not yet. A familiar yet unfamiliar road. About an hour in, I realized I wasn't sure where I was. I had been following the GPS without thinking, just letting it guide me wherever it wanted. It wasn't until I noticed the lack of highway signs that I realized something was off. The road was too empty. Not just quiet, but completely devoid of any other cars. No gas stations. No mile markers. No exits. I glanced at the GPS screen. Turn left in 3.2 miles. I didn't recognize the road name it was showing me. That was strange, considering I had traveled this general route before. It wasn't a completely unknown area, but the names on the GPS looked wrong, like they had been replaced with something else. The more I looked at the screen, the less sense it made. Instead of normal city names, I saw words that weren't places at all. Hollow Bend. Echo Pass. The Crossing. They sounded like fictional places, the kind of names you'd see in some eerie, old ghost story. I shook my head and tried to laugh it off. Maybe my phone had bad reception, and the GPS was just glitching. Still, a small unease curled in my stomach. The first oddity, the GPS knows my name. Then it happened. The moment that changed everything. The GPS spoke again. But this time, instead of the usual monotone instructions, it said something that made my hands go cold against the steering wheel. You should stop for coffee soon, MC's name. I know how tired you get. My stomach dropped. It had said my name. Not my contact name. Not my driver profile. My actual name. I hadn't programmed that in. I hadn't spoken out loud. I hadn't connected the GPS to anything. My breath hitched in my throat, and I quickly reached for my phone, checking the settings. Maybe I had accidentally linked my contacts or synced it with something. But no, the GPS wasn't connected to anything. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, no data. It shouldn't have been able to say my name. It shouldn't have known who I was. A slow, crawling fear crept up my spine. But I told myself it was nothing. A coincidence. A glitch. Maybe I had misheard it. Yeah, that had to be it. I swallowed hard and kept driving. The GPS starts helping me. A few more miles passed in silence. I tried to shake the feeling off, but something about the road felt different now. Every now and then, the GPS would suggest things I hadn't asked for. Turn right ahead. There's a gas station you like. I hesitated. I was only at half a tank. How did it know I usually stopped around this point? Then, a minute later, there's a rest stop if you need a break. You always forget to take breaks. I gripped the wheel tighter. The GPS wasn't just giving me directions. It was making decisions for me. An unfamiliar road that shouldn't exist. 30 minutes later, the GPS rerouted on its own. A new road appeared on the screen. A road I had never seen before. But when I looked up, there it was. A small, winding path cutting through the dense, dark woods. A place I was sure had never been there before. I slowed down, my fingers hovering over the power button, ready to turn the GPS off completely. That's when it spoke again. You've been here before. A chill shot through my veins. My heart skipped a beat. I had never been here before. I was sure of it, but something in my gut twisted, because the way the voice had said it sounded so certain, like it was reminding me of something I had forgotten. Dread creeps in. I swallowed down the lump in my throat and forced a laugh. This is stupid, I muttered mostly to myself. It's just a malfunction. A weird bug. Nothing else. The GPS didn't respond. The road stretched on in front of me, disappearing into the darkness. I told myself I would drive just a little further, just until I reached a familiar landmark. Then I would turn back. I had no idea I had already gone too far. Final moments before the real horror begins. The next sign I saw didn't make sense. It was rusted, crooked, half covered in overgrown vines. But the words on it made my stomach twist into knots. Welcome back. My fingers went numb on the wheel. I slammed on the brakes. The GPS screen flickered. Recalculating. My breath came out in sharp gasps. No, this wasn't right. This couldn't be right. I had never been here before. Had I? The last words the GPS says in the introduction. For the first time, I felt a deep, horrible sense of being watched. Like something was in the RV with me. Like something had been waiting for me to realize the truth. Then in the silence, the GPS spoke one last time. And this time, it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Keep driving, MC's name. You're almost home. A wrong turn that feels intentional. My fingers hovered over the GPS screen. The last words it had spoken echoed in my head. Keep driving, MC's name. You're almost home. I wasn't home. I wasn't even close. I didn't recognize the road ahead, and I sure as hell didn't remember ever being in this area before. But somehow the GPS did. A bead of sweat rolled down the back of my neck as I tapped the screen, trying to zoom out of the map. Nothing happened. The interface was frozen, completely unresponsive. I reached for my phone, intending to check my actual location, but as soon as I unlocked it, the GPS voice spoke again. There's no signal here, MC's name. Don't bother. I flinched so hard that I nearly dropped the phone. The screen was blank. No bars. No Wi-Fi. No emergency signal. Just nothing. I was completely cut off. My grip on the wheel tightened. This is just a glitch, I muttered under my breath. A bug. That's all. Even as I said it, I didn't believe it, because glitches don't know your name, and glitches don't anticipate your actions. The loop begins. The trees on either side of the road thickened, pressing in like silent onlookers. The further I drove, the narrower the road became, like it was closing in. The GPS chimed. Turn right ahead. I barely noticed the road at first. It was a small dirt path, barely wide enough for my RV, cutting into the woods. There were no signs, no indicators, nothing that suggested it was meant to be driven on. My gut screamed at me to ignore it. But my hands, they twitched on the wheel, almost instinctively moving to follow the command. Like my body was reacting before my mind could. I shook off the eerie sensation and pressed past the turn. My foot stayed firmly on the gas. I wasn't about to take some random dirt road into the woods, especially when I was already feeling lost. The GPS fell silent. For a moment, I thought I had overridden it. Then, just as I started to relax, recalculating, I glanced at the screen, and my stomach dropped. The route had changed, but the destination stayed the same. And the new path. It led me right back to that same dirt road. No matter which way I went, the GPS kept rerouting me, bringing me back to the same damn turn. It knows my thoughts. A deep, unsettled feeling crept into my chest. I swallowed hard, pushing down the growing dread. "You're wrong," I muttered, gripping the wheel. "There has to be another way." The GPS laughed. Not a robotic chuckle. Not a distortion of static. A real, human laugh. Soft. Amused. Like it knew something I didn't. "There's no other way," MC's name. The voice had shifted. It still had that smooth, GPS-like tone, but now there was something else. A presence. A familiarity. Like it had been listening to me for a very long time. My breathing turned shallow. My mind raced. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a malfunction. This was something else. And it knew me. Knew my name. Knew my habits. Knew my thoughts. I reached for the power button, fingers trembling. But before I could turn the damn thing off. "That won't work," MC's name. I froze. The screen glitched, flickering between maps and static. Then the voice returned, smooth and confident. "You always hesitate before making a decision." A chill shot down my spine. I hadn't said a word. But it was right. How did it know? Nowhere feels safe. I pressed my foot down harder on the gas. I wasn't going to let some possessed GPS control me. But no matter how far I drove, the scenery never changed. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, a repeating pattern of towering trees, empty pavement, and flickering headlights. Like I was stuck in place. I glanced at the odometer. It said I had driven 6 miles. But I knew deep in my bones that I had been driving way longer than that. I flicked my headlights to high beam, trying to pierce the shadows ahead. The further I looked, the more I started to notice something wrong. The trees. They weren't just trees. Some of them had things hanging from them. Shapes. Human-shaped. Swinging gently in the wind. My breath hitched in my throat. But before I could react, the GPS spoke again. "You're going in circles," MC's name. "But don't worry. I can help." I gritted my teeth. I wasn't about to let this thing dictate my actions. I turned off the main road, choosing a random path that wasn't on the map. Something new. Something different. For a moment, I thought I had outsmarted it. But then, a few miles later, the same rusted road sign appeared on my right. The same twisted trees. The same swinging silhouettes. I had ended up right back where I started. And this time, the GPS didn't just give me new directions. It whispered, "You're getting tired, aren't you? I can take over." The question that shouldn't be possible. The air in the RV felt heavier now, like something was in there with me. I tried to keep my focus on the road, but my hands were sweating against the wheel. Then the GPS asked a question that made my entire body go cold. "Do you remember your own destination?" The way it said it, like it knew the answer before I did, like it knew something I didn't want to admit. I opened my mouth to argue, to curse, to yell at it to shut up, but nothing came out, because the truth was I didn't remember. I had taken this trip to get away. But from what? Where was I supposed to be going? My heart pounded in my chest. Something was wrong. Not just with the road. Not just with the GPS. Something was wrong with me. Final hook leading to the unexplainable intensifies. I had to stop. I had to pull over, catch my breath, clear my head. I gripped the wheel tighter, scanning the dark road for a safe place to stop. Then I saw it. A gas station. Old. Run down. Flickering neon lights. Like it had been waiting for me. The GPS spoke, its voice soft and inviting. "You're almost there," MC's name. "Come inside." And this time, I wasn't sure if I had a choice. The gas station loomed ahead, its neon sign flickering erratically. The structure was old and abandoned looking, the kind of place that felt like it had been left behind by time. But something about it felt wrong. Too perfect. Too convenient. Like it had been waiting for me. I slowed the RV, pulling into the cracked lot, my tires crunching over gravel. The GPS spoke softly, its voice smooth and inviting. Go inside, MC's name. You need to rest. The moment the words left its speakers, I felt it. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, thick and unnatural. It didn't make sense. Just a few minutes ago, I had been alert, awake, but now my limbs were heavy, my eyelids drooping, like something was pulling me under. I gritted my teeth, shaking my head, trying to force the exhaustion away. No, I wasn't going inside. I wasn't going to play along with whatever this was. I reached for the ignition, ready to leave, but the RV turned off on its own. The engine cut out instantly, the dash lights flickering dead. Silence. Thick. Pressing. Then the GPS whispered, "Don't fight it. Just go inside." Trapped in place. I gripped the wheel, my breathing ragged. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. I needed to get out of here. I yanked the key from the ignition, shoved it back in, and twisted hard. Nothing. Not even the click of the starter. My phone. Still no signal. Panic coiled in my chest, but I forced it down. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't. I just had to. Knock. Knock. A sharp knocking against my driver's side window nearly stopped my heart. I jerked my head to the side, expecting to see someone. But there was nothing there. Just the reflection of my own wide-eyed face in the glass. And yet, I had heard it. 2 distinct, deliberate knocks. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. Then, knock. Knock. This time on the passenger window. I snapped my head toward it. Nothing. No one. I grabbed the door handle, my instincts screaming at me to run. But the GPS spoke again. The station calls to me. A sharp, icy chill raced through me. I didn't want to go inside, but the air inside the RV was changing. It was subtle at first. The temperature dropped. The space felt smaller. Then, I noticed the condensation. Not just on the windows, on the walls, on the ceiling, like the RV itself was breathing. A sickening dampness spread through the air, clinging to my skin. Drip. A slow, thick droplet fell from the ceiling. Drip. Another. The roof was sweating. Something inside me snapped. I had to get out. Now. I threw the door open and stumbled into the night. The air outside felt thick. The gas station's neon sign hummed softly, casting long, flickering shadows across the cracked pavement. The door to the station was already open, waiting, like it knew I was coming, like it knew I had no choice. Inside the empty store. Stepping inside felt like stepping into another world. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the air changed. The outside noise vanished. No wind. No insects. No hum of the RV cooling behind me. Just silence. The store was dimly lit, its fluorescent lights buzzing weakly overhead. The aisles were lined with dusty shelves, stocked with long-expired products. Cans with peeling labels. Soda bottles filled with something dark and thick. Everything looked wrong. Like this place hadn't seen a customer in decades. And yet, the register light was on. The computer screen flickered. And then, the GPS voice came from inside the store. "You've made it," MC's name. I stiffened. I turned my head slowly, and froze. Behind the counter, where a cashier should be, the GPS screen sat on the register. My GPS, sitting there glowing, waiting. And it was smiling. The screen wasn't a normal map anymore. It was a face. Distorted. Abstract. Grinning. I took a step back, my pulse hammering. "What the hell is this?" I rasped. The screen flickered. The smile widened. Then the GPS spoke. "The road isn't real," MC's name. "You've been driving in circles. But don't worry." The fluorescent lights flickered. The air thickened. The aisle seemed longer now. And the GPS whispered, "You've already arrived. Nowhere to run." Something moved in the aisles. A shifting shadow. Too tall. Too thin. It wasn't just standing there. It was watching me. The breath hitched in my throat. My legs refused to move. The GPS screen pulsed with static. "Look at it," MC's name. "It's been waiting for you." I didn't want to. I didn't want to see it. But my body, it wasn't listening. My head turned, like a puppet on invisible strings. And then I saw it. The figure in the aisle. Its arms were too long, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. Its mouth was moving, but no sound came out. And then, it stepped closer. I stumbled back, knocking over a shelf. The crash echoed, too loud. The GPS voice hummed in amusement. You can't leave, MC's name. My chest heaved. I tore my gaze away from the thing in the aisle and ran. Straight for the door. I grabbed the handle, yanked hard, and the door wouldn't budge. Like it wasn't a door anymore. Like it was just part of the wall. A sealed exit. The loop closes. Behind me, the GPS kept speaking. You wanted a destination, MC's name. And now you have one. I turned. The figure in the aisle was gone. The only thing left was the GPS screen, glowing softly. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. You're lying, I whispered. The GPS laughed again. Am I? And then, the RV horn blared outside. I whirled around. Through the dirty glass window of the station, I saw my own RV's headlights staring back at me. The engine was on. The door was open. Like it was waiting. Like it was calling me back. And I knew, without a doubt, if I stepped inside, I wouldn't be the one driving anymore. The GPS spoke one last time. Go on, MC's name. It's time to finish the trip. And somehow, I already knew. The road wasn't going to end. Not ever. A choice that isn't mine. The RV's headlights burned into the gas station's glass window, cutting through the dim interior like piercing eyes. The engine was running. The door was open, waiting, a silent invitation. I took a step toward it, my boots scraping against the tiled floor. A chill ran down my spine, the kind that sinks into your bones and refuses to leave. I knew, with every fiber of my being, if I got back in that RV, I wouldn't be driving anymore. But I also knew something worse. I didn't have a choice. Not anymore. The gas station shifts. Behind me, the store was changing. The aisles seemed longer. The flickering fluorescent lights dimmed. The shadows between the shelves grew thicker, deeper, moving. Something lurched forward. A long, impossibly thin limb stretched out from the darkness. Then another. The figure in the aisle wasn't just standing anymore. It was crawling toward me, and it knew my name. Its mouth moved silently at first, but then, I heard it, not from its lips, from the GPS screen still glowing behind the counter. Come back, MC's name. It's time to drive. The thing's head snapped upward, its neck twisted, and for the first time, I saw its face. No eyes, no nose, just a gaping mouth stretched wide, grinning, and it was whispering my name over and over. I have to run. I turned and bolted, not toward the gas station door. It wasn't a door anymore, just a flat wall. The exit was gone. The only way out was the RV. I didn't think. I sprinted toward it, my pulse pounding. My own shadow stretched unnaturally ahead of me, cast by the headlights. For a split second, I could swear. There were two shadows. Mine, and something else. Something right behind me. The moment I reached the door, I didn't hesitate. I jumped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. Back behind the wheel. The moment I was in the driver's seat, the GPS screen flickered. The map was gone. Now it was just a face. Still distorted. Still grinning. But now the eyes were open, and they were looking directly at me. The voice came softly at first. Good. Now drive. My hands moved on their own. I grabbed the wheel, my foot pressing against the gas pedal. I didn't want to, but I had to. The RV lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. The headlights cut through the darkness. But there was no road. Just endless, empty blackness. The GPS chuckled. There is only forward now, MC's name. No turning back. The world outside isn't real anymore. I glanced at the side mirrors, and my stomach dropped. The gas station. It wasn't behind me. Nothing was. No road. No stars. Just an endless void. I gritted my teeth. This is a nightmare, I muttered, my voice shaking. The GPS screen flickered. No, MC's name. This is your destination. I grabbed the wheel tighter. There had to be a way out. There had to be. The rearview mirror moved. Not shook. Not tilted. It turned on its own. Slowly. Deliberately. Until it was facing me. And inside it, I saw something sitting in the passenger seat. The passenger. I didn't turn my head. I couldn't. Because I knew if I looked directly at it, I'd lose. The thing in the mirror was grinning. Not like a normal smile. It was too wide. Too stretched. And I realized something that made my breath catch in my throat. The smile was mine. My own reflection. But wrong. The GPS spoke again. You've arrived, MC's name. The thing in the mirror tilted its head. I saw its lips move. But the voice came from inside my own head. Switch seats with me. I squeezed my eyes shut. This wasn't real. This wasn't. Then the engine roared. The RV accelerated on its own. The world outside rushed past in a blur of colors that shouldn't exist. I tried to slam the brakes, but my foot wouldn't move. The GPS let out a low, static-filled laugh. It's not your turn to drive anymore. Losing control. My fingers twitched on their own. My hands left the wheel, but I wasn't the one moving them. It felt like invisible strings were pulling them away. I tried to resist, tried to fight, but my arms lifted anyway. My body turned toward the passenger seat, and the thing sitting there, it was still grinning, still watching me. I opened my mouth to scream, but it spoke first, with my own voice. It's okay, I'll drive now. Then, it lunged. Blackness. A cold, suffocating darkness swallowed everything. I felt like I was falling, spinning. Then, silence. No more motion. No more road. Just nothing. For a long moment, I thought I was dead. Until I heard the sound of a turn signal. Click, 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 and a voice. My voice. Next exit in 1 mile. Who's driving? I woke up behind the wheel. The RV was still moving. The highway stretched ahead, illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard. The GPS screen flickered, casting eerie blue light over the interior. For a moment, everything felt normal, like I had just zoned out, like everything that happened before was just a bad dream. But then I looked at my hands. They were on the steering wheel, firm, still, in control. Except, I didn't remember putting them there, and I didn't remember waking up. The road that shouldn't exist. I flicked my eyes to the side mirror. No other cars, no headlights, just a flat, endless stretch of road. Something about it felt wrong. The pavement was too smooth. The sky was too dark. And then I noticed, the lines on the road weren't painted. They were moving, like ink slowly swirling in water, shifting, changing, like they weren't lines at all, but something alive, something breathing. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I pressed the brakes. Nothing happened. I pressed harder. Still nothing. The RV kept going, steady, controlled, like it didn't need me to drive it anymore, like it was going somewhere on its own. The voice in the GPS. The GPS lit up. The screen displayed a single glowing route, a road that I knew wasn't real, a road that led nowhere. And then, the voice spoke. But it wasn't the robotic, monotone voice anymore. It was mine. Keep driving. A chill shot up my spine. It wasn't just mimicking my voice. It was me, breathing, pausing, sounding tired, like someone speaking from inside my own head. I swallowed hard. Where am I? The GPS flickered. The voice came again, softer this time. Don't you remember? This is where you were always going. I look in the mirror. I felt my hands tremble on the wheel. I needed to stop. I needed to. The rearview mirror shifted. Not shook. Not tilted. It turned on its own. So it was facing me. And for the first time, I saw my reflection. And it wasn't me. It was someone wearing my face. But the eyes were wrong. Too dark. Too deep. Like they weren't eyes at all. Just a void. It smiled. Not in a friendly way. Not even in a cruel way. Just like someone getting comfortable. Settling in. Like someone who knew this wasn't their first time. And then it spoke. Your exit is coming up. The exit that shouldn't exist. The GPS map shifted. The glowing blue line twisted, curving toward an exit ramp that wasn't there before. My stomach turned to ice. There was no exit sign. No road marker. Just a narrow path leading into complete darkness. A tunnel with no lights. No end in sight. And yet, I felt the steering wheel turning on its own, guiding me toward it. My foot wasn't on the gas anymore, and it didn't need to be. The RV was driving itself. No, it was driving me. I fought against it. I pulled at the wheel. I pressed the brakes. Nothing. The voice in the GPS chuckled. It's okay. You've been here before. How many times have I done this? The darkness swallowed the RV. The headlights barely cut through it. The air felt thick, like the weight of something unseen was pressing down on me. I tried to slow my breathing, tried to think, but my mind wasn't mine anymore. Memories flickered, not of the past, but of something else, something before. Images flashed in my mind, me, gripping the wheel in terror. The GPS, always leading me here. The same exit ramp, the same tunnel, the same realization that I've done this before, and I will do it again, and again, and again. The GPS screen glowed brighter. Welcome back. The final stop. A light appeared at the end of the tunnel. For a moment, I felt hope. A way out. A destination. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a light at all. It was a mirror. Huge. Massive. Stretching across the entire end of the tunnel. And inside it, I saw myself, sitting in the RV, driving, but not looking at the road, looking directly at me, and grinning. The same grin I saw in the rearview mirror. The grin of the thing that wasn't me. And then, I understood. I wasn't driving toward the mirror. I was driving into it. The final words of the GPS. The GPS voice spoke one last time. And it wasn't just using my voice anymore. It was laughing, like someone settling into their new home, like someone taking over. And as the RV slammed into the glass, everything shattered, and my world went dark. Aftermath, a new driver. The sound of a turn signal clicking. Click, click, click. A faint glow from the GPS screen. The road stretching ahead. The RV's engine humming softly. A deep, slow breath. And then, a voice. Calm. Even. Like someone getting comfortable. Where to?